the newsagents.
We are going to have a special question and answer edition devoted to the United States of America, because a few things have been happening there over the past few days.
And you have been writing in with your questions. And David is first off the block. And he says, "Hi, newsagents, regular listener here in Seattle, Washington." Wonder if he's bumped into Lewis. "Given that Biden has pulled out, what's the likelihood of him being declared unfit to continue to serve as president? This would give us our first taste of Kamala as president, and I wonder if it could end up being a gift to Trump. Love the show, your analysis, and the Sopel rants."
David, I have no idea what you are talking about. I do not rant. I'm a person of reason and rationality, and I think it is absolutely absurd of you to suggest that I am one who goes off on one and loses his cool and starts hyperventilating.
Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily. We calm down yet?
And now I've taken one of my tablets. I think I've calmed down. My blood pressure's come down a bit. 140 over 90, so I'm okay now. Right.
So the question really was, could Joe Biden, having already said he won't fight on after November, could he actually pull out earlier and give Kamala the chance between now and November, the first week of November, to govern?
Yes, it is possible if Joe Biden chose to do so himself. But I think the address to the nation he gave 2 nights ago means that that is very unlikely to happen. The one thing we haven't talked about at all on the podcast in the past, couple of months, where we've been debating almost daily Joe Biden's health, is the 25th Amendment. And it is absolutely conceivable that if his health deteriorated to such an extent that his cabinet felt that he was no longer fit to carry on, then they could try to invoke the 25th Amendment, which says, if someone is unfit to carry on in office, you have a majority of your cabinet pass a motion saying he's unfit, and that goes to the House of Representatives to be confirmed, and you are effectively kicked out of office. And there were suggestions back in 2020, 2021, when Donald Trump, after January the 6th, had not condemned, there was the threat from within his own cabinet that unless he said and condemned the rioters on January the 6th, they would move the 25th Amendment to remove him forcibly from office. And that is something, I'm just talking about constitutional arrangements. Do I think this will happen? No, but that is the mechanism by which you could remove someone from office.
I just think politically it is hugely risky to do that, because the one thing Joe Biden doesn't want to do is primarily lose to Donald Trump, and secondarily somehow stain his own presidency. And he's already basically taken this unprecedented step. I mean, we say, unprecedented, and certainly in the last 40, 50 years, since 1968, since LBJ did it. And if you go back to the LBJ speech, what's amazing is that he was speaking about the war in Vietnam. I mean, it was a long speech. It was a 40-minute speech. He was speaking about the war in Vietnam for about, 20 minutes. And he suddenly makes this handbrake turn and says, "I will not seek," the famous line, "I will not seek the thing, nor will I accept the candidacy, blah, 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 blah." And it comes as a real shock in the middle of the speech. The fact that Biden has actually sort of fermented this over the course of the month. He's done the deed on Sunday night by way of statement. He's now done the actual sort of performative relinquishing of the candidacy with his whole family there in the Oval Office, I think means that he wants to put a line under it now. And I think that he will feel he has done as much as he can to set Kamala up to win, to give her the best start, to give her his benediction, but actually to see himself out graciously.
Yeah, I think you will see Republicans saying that he's not fit to carry on, and if he's not fit to run, he's not fit to carry on, therefore he ought to go. I don't think that I think the Democratic Party has got to the place where it wanted to get to, which was to persuade him to do it, before we drag you out of the White House, why don't you announce that you're not running because you can't win in November? So they've got to the place they want to get him. So I don't think anyone in his cabinet would move against him unless there was a sudden and dramatic deterioration. And frankly, if there was, then I think, look, Father Time waits for no man or woman. So, if Father Time decides that it's Joe Biden's moment has passed, then I think Joe Biden
the decision is made.
The decision is made. But unless something like that happens, then I think that Joe Biden sees out his 6 months in office. But it's going to be fascinating because, how do you carry on when you kind of haven't, you're going to go and...
I feel like I may be speaking to deaf ears here, but I forced my whole family to watch the film Dave. And if you haven't seen Dave, please just go and watch Dave because it has never been more relevant. It's about a president who falls into a coma, who gets replaced by a really lovely lookalike, who comes in and actually falls in love with the president's wife and does wonderful things for orphans and sort of, is very nice to the staff. And the whole premise is what happens if the president is incapacitated and can somebody imitate the role of president and who has the power ultimately when you step into the president's shoes. It is a rom-com, okay? I mean, I'm not going to get carried away here, but it's a really good moment of just seeing that people have imagined this situation, right? We have had presidents in the White House before completely incapacitated.
That is why there is the 25th Amendment.
There was the guy who was injured, who stayed, I think, in paralysis.
Yeah.
For I don't know if it was a coma, but it was paralysis for 3 months.
I think
Garfield, exactly. Yeah. So, there have been these moments that have taught,
Or there has been
the Constitution how to make amendments for this sort of event, right?
Or there have been the occasions where a president has had to undergo a medical procedure and they're under general anaesthetic. Who has control in that situation? And so the vice president steps up, and for that brief moment, the 25th Amendment is invoked, and they are the president. In effect.
Does Kamala get to make policy now? Will there be any policy? There probably won't be any policy. But that's the weirdest thing. If something happens to America now, I mean, God forbid, right? But if something happens on a mega scale of the kind of things that we have seen happen in the past, who steps up? Right?
Well, you can be sure that one of the things that has shifted as a result of Biden's statement that he's not running again in November is that the caricature of Veep, brilliantly created by Armando Iannucci, is now no longer relevant. Kamala Harris is no longer Vice President Myers. Kamala Harris is in a position of power. She will need to be consulted on everything. She's not going to be a wallflower who is ignored. Because I think that, Biden knows that she needs to be brought into every decision.
Every single bit.
From now on.
OK, David, we're going to move on to Joey. And this is a voice note.
Hi newsagents, this is Joey in Cumbria. I saw a tweet the other day that said that often when women enter politics in a position of power, they are referred to by their first name when their male counterparts are often used, the last name is used. And it's something that I've become aware of since listening to the election coverage in the UK and have now started noticing now that Kamala Harris has become the likely Democratic nomination for president. Is this something that you're aware of, and is it something that you would like to address? It would be great to see equity between both genders in political coverage.
God, such an interesting...
So smart. It's so smart. And of course, you look back and it's absolutely right that we call Vance, Vance. We call Trump, Trump, not Donald. We call Biden, Biden. And we call Kamala, Kamala. Now, I would say...
There is a but.
Well, I would say the precedent for that was that we had to call Hillary, Hillary because there was a Clinton. And so if you start saying Clinton this and Clinton that, people started going, what, Bill or Hillary? What, Bill or Hillary? So, I think, I actually don't have a leg to stand on here. I think,
Hang on. We used to take endless stick because we called Johnson Boris. We would repeatedly refer to him as Boris.
Yeah.
And I used to get a lot of stick whenever you don't refer to him as Boris. It sounds too chummy. It sounds too matey. Call him Johnson or Mr. Johnson or the Prime Minister. Don't call him Boris.
Yeah.
And we never referred to Blair as Tony. We didn't refer to Brown as Gordon.
No.
And so it really is interesting that why is it that some names stick out? I think with Johnson, probably because he was a game show host and there was all that, the fun of Boris.
I agree. And I also think it's to do with you choose the more recognisable name. So Johnson is not a particularly memorable name. whereas Boris is.
And Harris is not a memorable name.
And Harris gets lost in the whole kind of, normalcy. I think she has Irish roots. I was messaging my Irish friend. Apparently, they're always trying to find... They're always trying to find the Irish connection.
She's got a Jamaican... her Jamaican father...
think it was Irish... it was Jamaican descents of Irish slave owners. So, the Irish will be delighted that there is... they can reach out a hand to...
Slave-owning Irish people is not the greatest link to Ireland.
You're right. You're right. But, okay, so the question is it a sign of affection? Is it a sign of kind of enthusiasm?
I don't think it's demeaning.
People don't call Taylor... Or what do they call her? They call her Taylor Swift. So maybe we should just say Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Emily Maitlis. I love putting my name in there. Did you notice that?
Well, they're very... I mean, it's so often that you hear Taylor Swift and Emily Maitlis in the same sentence. I mean,
never in the same room at the same time.
Exactly.
Joey, we're actually not laughing. I think you've made a really good point, and I'm going to notice it more because you've said that now.
I also think what we're going to have to do, and I was in the US at the time of the last election, where we had endless memos from the pronunciation department of the BBC about how to pronounce.
It's definitely Kamala.
It's not. Apparently it's Kamala.
Oh, okay.
That was what we were told.
Kamala.
But it's kind of by popular, and Donald Trump did this whole ghastly thing, emphasising the foreignness of her or her background by going, I don't know whether it's Kamala, and he did this.
Yeah,
whole
he did that to Nikki Haley. Do you remember? Yeah. It's like, just in case you haven't noticed, that she's a bit Indian.
She's
exactly.
not quite white.
She's
enough.
not quite. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, complicated, isn't it?
Right. Let's get this question now from Daniel Woodrow. Will there be any debates between the candidates? I know one was scheduled for the 10th of September, but wondered if this would still go ahead, or even if there could be more. Thank you. I think I think it depends on the polls entirely. I think if Trump is still decisively ahead in the sort of 6 kind of swing states that, you tend to think about, or 5 swing states that you tend to think about, why is he going to subject himself to the risk of being knocked about by Kamala Harris, in a way that he would find very disagreeable and could expose him to downside risk?
I think she's champing at the bit.
Oh, I bet she is.
She was up against Pence last time round, and it was the one where he had, do you remember, the very white hair and the very black fly? It's worth having a look. But she was quite good in that. And I think she was good because I mean, this is my sense, that every American woman in a position of power has to pretend that she is not in a position of power so she doesn't look too scary. Right? You see that the whole time. This sort of slightly over smile, speak very calmly, tone it all down, don't scare the horses. That's what she did in that debate. And I think up against Donald Trump, she can probably afford to be a bit more fiery, have a bit more fun with it, because he will be the one. We've heard his lines. We've heard his lines.
She's a left-wing lunatic. She's nuts. She's totally... All of that is what Trump is trying to portray. Her controlled... prosecutorial, precision questions that could be very, very uncomfortable for Donald Trump, I reckon.
So it's his to lose and his to decide. You think that?
I think that's where we are.
I think it will happen.
Well, I hope so. But what Trump has done now is he has said, so the next debate I think was due to be on ABC, which is obviously one of the main TV networks, which is kind of doesn't have a dog in the fight, kind of supposed, more like the BBC. And Trump has said, I want it to be on Fox News instead.
Exactly. Yeah.
I.e., I want it to be on a sympathetic broadcaster who will give me an easier time of it and make sure it's loaded against Kamala Harris. And I don't think that Harris's team will agree to that. But I think she'd probably agree to most debates. Actually, the last Fox debates have been pretty well done.
Yeah,
they haven't shown that kind of degree of kind of bias or,
Didn't Chris Wallace did the one just before COVID?
Yeah, and he was very effective in it.
Yeah. I love this one from Lucy because she ends by saying, thanks so much for all you do. And we just sit here and chat, really. Lucy,
well, speak for yourself. I think very deeply.
John thinks deeply and then rants. Big fan of the podcast, men. Thanks for all the emergencies of late. Much appreciated. Question is, if the Democrats win in November, do you think we'll see another insurrection or perhaps something even worse? Not to be pessimistic, but I can't see Donald Trump or his fans taking it well.
Look, it's a question I've mulled. I mean, for the future
Very deeply.
for the future of American democracy, is it more likely that there'll be disturbance if he wins or if he loses? And in the short term, I think the danger of political unrest is obviously heightened if he loses. I don't know whether he will ever have circumstances so propitious as November 2020, when we're in the midst of the madness of COVID, and there have been so many more postal votes than had ever been lodged in an election before. I don't know what Trump's excuse will be. Trump's this time round is going to encourage people to
He made a massive error, actually, over denigrating the postal vote.
Yes.
Because there will be lots of Republicans that are older that would much prefer to vote postally.
The Mail, Pale and Stale Brigade.
Right. MAIL. Right. And he has already made them feel that they cannot trust the postal vote, which I don't think is a clever way of going about your next election. Right? If people are sort of put off doing that, will they just stay at home? Will they not vote at all? Will they not trust the system? So it's not a great idea to put people off, democracy anyway. The question that I asked last week of Carrie Lake was one I think that we will have to ask a lot of people standing, which is, will you accept the results, whatever happens in your own race? Because that will set the climate as well. Carrie Lake standing to be a senator in Arizona, a very tight swing state, has been previously. She didn't concede last time round. In fact, she, wanted to send her opponents to prison for believing that Donald Trump should, back down. And so I guess the question is now, what will he tell people? Right? What will he tell people to do? What will they decide to do if they think that they haven't gain that seat, because that will start to inform the rest of the race?
You've got JD Vance on the ticket, who has already said that had he been the vice president in 2020, when it was Mike Pence, he wouldn't have certified Joe Biden's election victory. So we're in a very different situation from that point of view. We also know that there is a Supreme Court that is 6-3 with a Conservative majority. But the difference this time round is that the intelligence, the law enforcement agencies are in a different place than they were in 2020, when the Capitol was overwhelmed and they couldn't resist the crowd. I think that this time round there'll be huge amounts of law and order on the streets to ensure that something like that is not repeated.
I mean, honestly, when I look back to that inauguration week, it was the strangest feeling in Washington. Because it was post January the 6th and still in the middle of COVID. I mean, I'm trying to remember, I think we were still wearing masks the whole time, right? And so there was something just deathly quiet about the whole atmosphere. There were sort of masked security people, soldiers, actually, people with guns, the whole place, all over the place in Washington, and no one else on the streets.
It had become a city of siege.
Yeah.
I can't describe what it was like the January the 20th, 2021, for Joe Biden's inauguration. And I had to get to the Capitol, to our broadcasting position, where I was sort of involved in the live commentary of the inauguration ceremony. And rows of razor wire along streets.
Exactly.
And police Humvees, army Humvees, at the end of every block, about a mile from the Capitol. You had to show a special pass to get anywhere near. And you were going through checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint. It was a war zone.
It was really uncomfortable, wasn't it?
And the whole idea of democracy is that it's open.
Yeah.
And that people can vote and people can see their leaders.
Particularly in America, actually. I mean, the public are welcomed into those public spaces. You have a bag check, but that's it. It is meant to be open to everyone to use. And that, that combination of COVID and insurrection meant the whole place felt a bit like the Civil War film, didn't it? Sort of shut down.
I mean, Lucy, it's a great question that you've asked. I hope to God there is no trouble, that there is a peaceful transfer of power, that someone sends the Republican Party and Donald Trump and JD Vance a video of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer
Having a little laugh.
Peacefully, graciously, in a dignified manner, passing over the baton, because that's how democracy is done.
We'll be back after the break.
So, let's start off with this question from Rob Nolan. With Biden stepping out of this race, he becomes the second consecutive one-term president. Given the current polarised state of US politics, are two-term presidencies becoming a thing of the past? That's a really interesting question, Rob. No, I don't think it does mean that. I think that we have seen two very particular sets of circumstances where Donald Trump kind of imploded, and the madness of his presidency was sort of shown in the kind of bizarre reaction to COVID, where he's flip-flopping all over the place about whether he believes that the US economy should shut down and whether people should wear masks or not. Yes, they should wear masks, but I'm not going to wear one because I'm the president. And I just think people grew so weary of the noise and chaos of Donald Trump that that's what led to his defeat. There was no enthusiasm for Biden. It was just, we've had enough of Trump. And this time round, I think the circumstances are exceptional because of Biden's age. I think if it had been a 52-year-old who had won the election in 2020, who was now 56, then it would be a different story. They would be running for a second term.
Yeah, I wonder if Trump has just cut through American politics the way Brexit did UK politics, i.e. just against the grain of everything we've known. So what used to be right and left just became leave or remain, and it cut through the grain in a totally different way. And I genuinely think Trump has done that. I think there hasn't been anything like him before, and I don't think there will be anything like him afterwards. And so in a way that has to go some way to explaining this sort of like, he came in like a wrecking ball, didn't he? He was that 4 years. He embodied that 4 years. And then he was out the other side. And the extraordinary thing really, I guess, is that we are back sort of going, is America going to do this again? Is it going to do this again? That's the shocking thing. Not just that, he only got 4 years or that Biden only got 4 years because of his age, but the fact that we are now in a place where we might be about to repeat the 2016 election.
Yeah, I think that we are in an anomalous position with Donald Trump because American democracy hasn't really quite seen anything like Donald Trump. And if you look at the three presidents that preceded Trump, Obama serves 2 terms. George W. Bush serves 2 terms. Bill Clinton serves 2 terms. So, there had been a very long run. And George H.W. Bush only gets 1 term, but he had come 8 years after Reagan. So there had been 12 years of Republican rule. And so the pendulum has swung pretty regularly. And I think that actually, an American president, if they're doing their job reasonably well, stands a pretty good chance of winning a second term. I think Donald Trump was exceptional in his presidency. I think it was an exceptional presidency. And I think Joe Biden, had he been younger, would have thought, what, I've still got a reasonable shout at this. Because I think anyone much younger, if there had been a younger president who had been in Joe Biden's place for the past 4 years, they would be thinking, but I'll happily take on Donald Trump.
I think if you look at the speed of his legislative agenda, you understand that he also realised he might only have 4 years. I mean, he's got so much done so quickly, so much done, in terms of the COVID recovery, in terms of the IRA, in terms of the border stuff. I think he, when you look back, you go, a lot of that stuff would have been sort of, second term stuff, but he just didn't dare.
Yeah.
I'm not going to waste time. I'm just going to get it through now.
And I think that, going back 4 years, I think we always thought that Joe Biden was a transitional figure because of his age.
Because he said it.
Yeah.
Because he said, I'm a bridge.
Yeah, exactly. And, and obviously it's hard to, you always want to think that there is just noble purpose in a president and what they do. I think that Biden probably was slightly caught up in a narcissistic view. I can beat age. I'm fine. There's no, what is everyone talking about? There is no problem here. And he was probably egged on by his family a bit to think that he could serve a second term. I don't think we've seen the end of 2-term presidencies. Yeah. I think we are in an age of populism. And I think we are also slightly in an age, and we've seen this in British politics, where you rise and fall fast.
Very quickly.
I mean, Rishi Sunak's political career is arguably over. and he's not yet 50.
Yeah, but I also think there were people that went from Obama to Trump in 2016. So I think that sense of party loyalty is slightly more up in the air now. You know, that people are managing to make these huge shifts because somebody who had never voted Republican in their entire life would see Trump not as a Republican, but as, you know, they call themselves to be Trumplians. You know, so that cuts in a very different way across party lines as well.
Yes, and this makes it much more unpredictable
Yeah,
the way
exactly.
the elections will go, because you've got a lot of blue-collar workers, working class, who are voting Republican, whereas educated middle class, whose vested interest would probably be with the Republican Party, are voting Democrat.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of upside-down world of American politics now. Right, let us move on. This is from Rhys Turner in South Wales. Hi, newsagents. Big fan of the show, firstly. Thanks, Rhys. I was wondering what happens to the Republican Party if Donald Trump loses in November. He'd have no chance of running again in 2028. The party has bought fully into his cult of personality and drifted so far from the days of Bush and McCain, etc. Even with a narrow loss, would the party collapse without him at the helm? I can't see it being recovered by a more moderate figure.
Do you know what? We had a family conversation about what would have happened if that bullet had hit Trump. You know, just imagine, just go into the alternative version of history. What would have happened in that scenario? And the only person I can imagine who would have taken on the mantle would have been Don Jr., would have been his son. Because I don't think Trump fans would have accepted anyone else other than the loyalist sort of family member, the guy who literally carries his name, to take it on. But I think if Trump doesn't win in November, there will not be any more Trump or Trumpism. I mean, if you look at every single candidate that has tried to ape Trump, be like Trump, be endorsed by Trump, they've lost, right? They have not won in the midterms. They have not won in sort of governorships. They have not actually been able to copy what he has done. So I don't know. I think it is the end of Trumpism.
So I'm going to take the question that the way you answered it, and I'm going to answer it in two parts, because the first part where you say, just consider if the bullet had struck, it takes me back to Lucy's question. I think there could have been civil war in America if an assassin had taken out Trump. Every Democrat who'd ever said anything...
Civil war against who, though? I mean, he was a Republican.
No, it didn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Because any lawmaker who'd ever said anything critical, any Democrat who had gone after Trump would be a target. You brought this about. The media would have been targets. I think there would have been serious political unrest in America if the Trump assassination had happened. So I kind of thank the Lord.
Yeah, I agree.
You know,
but I also think that, funnily enough, when that happened, everyone was doing this whole, like, we've got to lower the temperature, now is not the time, let's keep it nice, let's keep politics good. None of that had anything to do with the 20-year-old guy who stood on the roof. I mean, we still don't know if there was a motive, we don't know what drove him, all the rest of it. But it's quite interesting how quickly it turned to a question of toxic political rhetoric. You know, it was probably more to do with gun crime and gun ownership than anything else.
Look, Donald Trump in his speech last night, you know, having stood up at the convention where you were at in Milwaukee saying, you know, of course, you know, having a gun fired at you does change the way you think. You know, I want unity, I want the party to come together, and I want the country to come together.
Which I can believe.
Yeah. And last night he was saying, you know what, I'm going to go back to being nasty. I think there's no point in being nice. There's no space. And the crowd started shouting, fight, fight, fight. Yeah. Donald Trump is back where he was. You questioned last week in Milwaukee. I wonder how much longer. Yeah, it hasn't lasted a week.
So just go back to the question.
Yeah,
which is like, if he had been shot. I mean, you're saying civil war. Would anyone have taken? Who would have taken on the mantle?
I don't know. Well, JD Vance would have just been. I mean,
he hadn't even been chosen.
Selected. He hadn't been selected. I don't know. It's a very good question. It wouldn't have been Nikki Haley. But
we have weird supper times.
But going back to the question of that Rhys poses, you know, the party of Bush and McCain has gone. This is where I disagree with you. I think it has to be someone Trumpian. The party is in the image now of Donald Trump. They're not going to select Nikki Haley to be the next presidential candidate. They hate Nikki Haley. All the people that turn up at the Republican convention, Nikki Haley,
she
you know,
got
Mitch
booed.
McConnell got booed.
Yeah.
All the people that represented the long history of republicanism are out. They are out in the cold. They are reviled. And I just do not see the circumstances in which you would get somebody like Nikki Haley or, you know, someone from the Bush family.
I get it, but actually, you know, he lost the popular vote in 2016. That's fine. That's not how America elects. He lost the popular vote in 2020. He hasn't actually had electoral successes, genuinely, since 2016, except for in this primary. So I'm kind of going, I understand that you're talking about, you know, the populism maybe, but I don't know. Who is the Trump? Who is the next Trump then?
I mean, maybe J.D. Vance would fancy his chances. There are a whole pile of people who, you know, ran for the Republican nomination and got booted out of the way. But I do not believe the Republican Party is any longer the party of John McCain, of Mitch McConnell, of Chris Christie, of Nikki Haley. They are outliers.
I agree. They're done.
They're done. So the Republican Party has probably got some of the same soul searching to do that the Conservative Party in Britain has right now.
Yeah. Okay. This is from Gary. And he says, "Dear newsagents, thank you for your magnificent podcast." Is Gary related to you? I have a question about the USA election. If Trump wins and wins Congress and the Senate, do you think he'll attempt to overturn the Constitution to seek a third term and more in a Putin-like move?
You know, some of the things that he has said make you fear for the future of American democracy, and some of the things that the Supreme Court has ruled on. I mean, you know, the ruling, the 6-3 ruling on whether the president has immunity. And, you know, if he's carrying out official functions, yeah, apparently he does have. So you don't know what he could do. I think there would be enormous resistance. I don't base this on anything much, but I do think that there is a resilience to American democracy, because I saw how exposed it was in 2020, that the checks and balances would sort of just about work and would prevent him becoming president for life. I don't think that would fly. I think that even though there are huge numbers of Trump supporters, but, you know, it could then work the other way, that you get a Democrat who says, right, well, I'm going to stay here forever and a day. I have to believe in American democracy. It's too depressing to think that there is an alternative where, you know, this changes. Yeah,
funny enough, I have nothing to add to that. I think, against all the odds, I believe that the system will uphold and will carry on. Yeah, because you kind of have to, don't you?
Yeah, and you know, and again, when I say it's not based on anything, you know, you look at what happened in 2020, and but for a few good people who did the right thing, you know, the Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia, Liz Cheney.
I mean, people who've all been rounded on and booted out.
Yeah, all the people that have been, you know, vilified now for what they did. They did the right thing and upheld the values of the US Constitution. Were someone to come along, were President Trump to come along and say, okay, right, I'm going to change the Constitution.
I mean, you just heard J.D. Vance say loyalty is everything. I wouldn't certify Biden. So who knows? Who knows?
Who knows?
That is basically the tagline of this entire episode.
We will be back in just a moment. We've got a question from Emily. Have you been writing in?
Yes, that's what I do. Once I leave here, I just go back and write questions to you.
That's good. Hi, John, Emily and Lewis. Love the podcast. Excellent UK election insights and can't wait for more ahead of November. If you had to pick the best president America never had, oh my God, who would it be? There was a silence descended in the newsagent's studio, and all that could be heard was the cogs whirring in Emily Maitlis' and John Sopel's brain.
I think there's lots of people that Democrats would love to see standing that never will. Michelle Obama is the classic. I cannot tell you how often I'm asked if Michelle Obama might come into the race. And the only thing I know about Michelle Obama is she bloody hates politics. Yeah. Like
she's bloody good at it.
She's really good. She's good at everything. You know, she is brilliant at everything. She's never going to stand. Would she? I mean, would she A, get elected? Probably. Would she make quite a good fist of it? Probably, but she won't. George Clooney, I think probably many Democrats think the same about him. On the Republican side, can you imagine somebody like Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger who'd actually stood up to the craziness of this anti-democratic rant? Would they have? I mean, they do espouse proper Republican values and policies and all the rest of it, anti-abortion, all the rest of it. But they actually would have upheld the values that come with kind of being an American citizen in a way that we didn't see from Trump in 2020.
The funny thing is that I look at some of the more recent races and you think, would it have mattered if Mitt Romney had won or John McCain had won? I mean, American politics would have gone 5 degrees further right or maybe 10 degrees further right, but it wouldn't have been kind of one of those, the fact of the matter is that American politics since the world, particularly as it relates to, say, the UK, since the Second World War, the post-war establishment has been that US presidents have been internationalist, have been outward-looking, have supported NATO, have kind of broadly believed in free trade as being a good thing for the world.
I mean,
and so therefore you kind of think, well, in a sense, was it a huge kind of shift if it was one person or it was another?
Okay, I mean, look, let's just throw this out there. The Bush-Gore 2000 election, right? If Al Gore had won that, I mean, if it hadn't been decided by the court, would we have seen the most environmental government America had ever seen? Would we be so far forward on kind of environment, and sort of climate change policies than we are? Or would he have never got into climate change in the same way because he wouldn't have been the guy who was looking for another project because he hadn't been president? I mean, back to that line, do you remember that Cameron said, I think, a year ago, he said, when you're Prime Minister, you have no time to think. And when you stop being Prime Minister, you have too much time to think. And arguably, you want to try and integrate those two sort of states of being, right?
I mean, it would have been lovely to think. I mean, obviously, the greatest president, that America never had was President Bartlett from the West Wing. I mean,
Dave, sorry to bring this back, but Dave was wonderful.
You're really off on one on Dave, aren't you? Yeah. I honestly, I think that what I loved about the West Wing was it gave you in a kind of this rose-tinted, sort of Vaseline-smeared lens of which to look through how the American presidency could be, where everyone is decent and funny and sassy and they're all pulling in the right direction.
God, it was of its age. I mean, it wasn't really self-questioning at all, was it? About sort of America getting a bit too pompous, a bit too up itself, a bit too sort of happy with its place in the world.
No,
I know that's clear.
I thought it was wonderful. They were all great. They were all saving the world. They were all decent people with slightly complicated love lives. It was perfect.
Okay, I'm going to end this podcast by admitting that I'm on a mission. One of the greatest political movies you will ever see, but probably haven't seen, is called Bob Roberts. It's Tim Robbins. It's extraordinary, and it's done in the style of a mockumentary, and you cannot find it on a single platform. So please try and find a place where we can stream Bob Roberts. It's really worth a view before November.
Is Emily Maitlis being paid by some film production company?
No, that's the point. There is no film production company that will have it.
I can't wait to see her declaration of interests. We will be back.
My declaration of interest, I love Bob Roberts, and you will too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.